Welcome to this pleasant February evening, time of the year when you start thinking about spring, hopefully some warmer temperatures. Today it's near 60 here in St. Louis, Missouri. The wind was blowing like a fiend, not as bad as yesterday, but it was windy. But that means spring is blowing in. So it seemed like a good evening to sit out, have a pipe, and talk about what I would like to see from KORG next. It's worth noting that this list is not based in reality. I have no way of knowing if any of these things make sense, if any of them are practical, if from a business perspective they would be the right moves. Doesn't matter. It's just a wish list, some things I think would be cool. So I'm going to run down this list for you. And I'd like to get your feedback. I hope you'll take an opportunity to comment on what you think about these. So, number one, the Kronos successor. I was surprised that the Kronos was discontinued when it was. And what I mean by that is I was surprised that it was discontinued without a successor already in place. I don't know if that has happened with KORG and their flag station workstation keyboards. I don't know if it's ever happened in their history where whatever was carrying the banner of the flagship was discontinued without having the next model. I lost track of what KORG was doing from the end of the Triton era, when they would have gone into I believe the M3, and then I think it was M3 to Oasis to Kronos. So I don't know if there's any downtime in between any of those, but it's been puzzling to me that the Nautilus, I guess, has been expected to be the workstation, the flagship workstation. But it was strange, in my opinion, in the timing of that, how the Nautilus came out and then they ran side by side for a while and then the Kronos is gone. And I'm not saying the Nautilus is not a worthy successor, maybe it is, but there are things that are not present, such as aftertouch. Take it or leave it. I mean, everybody has an opinion on things like aftertouch, but that's always been a part of the flagship model of a workstation for KORG. So aftertouch is not present on the Nautilus. I don't know what else isn't there. I mean, it seems like the engines, I should say, all made their way over. So, but that being said, again, I don't know that I could ever afford one. But I would just like to know that I live in a world where we have a true successor to the Kronos. Now, I'm going to talk about what I would like that to be in just a minute, some ideas that I have, but those kind of tie in with some of my other wish list items. So let's move on then to number two. Number two is sort of hard to describe other than to potentially say I would like to see a reverse rompler. And what I mean by that is, and again, this is selfish. I've got reasons for asking for these things or wishing for them, if you will. I've been playing with a band recently. I've upgraded. I have a KORG Prologue, and I upgraded from the 8 voice to the 16. Nothing to do with the number of voices, everything to do with the number of keys. The 49 was not working for me. So with this band, I'm able to use a lot of the analog sounds and it works. But there are a few songs where I need an acoustic piano. Could probably use, an acoustic piano. Let's just start with that. So if I had a reverse rompler, so if you think of, let's go all the way back to the M1 and let's talk about how It has all of your real instrument sounds in it, your pianos, organs, strings, bass, guitar, those type of things. But what does it also have? It also has digital emulations of analog sounds, and not a whole ton of them. Proportionally, they're a low percentage of the actual overall sounds, and really in any Rompler. But what if we had an analog synthesizer like the Prologue, that we had take that multi-engine that the Prologue has in it, which is a digital oscillator, and blow that up so that you could hold a sound engine that could give you the pianos and the strings and the bass and so on. I think that would be really interesting. I like the idea of being able to control those samples with all of the physical knobs and buttons that the Prologue gives you. You wouldn't have to menu dive at all like you do on a lot of the Romplers. So anyway, some sort of the Prologue is already considered a hybrid, I guess, because of the digital multi-engine, but some sort of an embellished multi-engine I think would be really cool. So that's my second wish. The third one would be a Trinity plug-in. And KORG has really done a good job of bringing a lot of their old synthesizers back in plug-in form. They've got a really nice collection of old synths available now. But what I'm thinking is the sound of the 90s. When you think vintage right now, you're thinking maybe late 70s, but into the early 80s, the Poly 6, the Mono Poly, and then getting into some of the DW series, just back in that era when things were sounding a lot different than they do now. There's a lot of that stuff that started to come over in emulation. KORG has the Poly 6, and in fact, it's in the Kronos and the Nautilus. There's a Mono Poly VST. But I've been puzzled as to why they haven't, and there's Triton. So basically, there's no plug-in for the Trinity, there's no plug-in for the O1W. And I found that to be a little puzzling. But I would like to see that. The Trinity that I have, I love the Trinity and I'll always have one. The one I have recently has started, I shouldn't say it started. I had one session where I sat down, and for the whole afternoon, the thing I'd play, and all of a sudden the volume would just die. And sometimes I could change patches and it would come back. Sometimes I had to power off. So I don't know if I've got a board that needs recapping. It's only done it once. Point being, the stuff's getting old. And so if you had the possibility of a Trinity plugin, I would at least feel good that I've got a backup if the hardware fails. And I told you I was going to talk a little bit about the Kronos successor. So imagine, the Kronos had I think 9 different multi-engines. I don't have one, I haven't had one. But, Poly 6, MS-20, those are both in there. So imagine a Kronos successor that gets a little more modern, and by a little more modern, I mean 15 years, that would come with a Trinity plug-in engine built into it, for example, or a wave station. And I know the KORG has the wave state now, I get that. But to be able to bring some of that 90s richness back, what a cool opportunity that would be, and probably a good marketing decision for KORG. As long as you can't buy the Trinity plug-in, maybe people would be interested in buying the keyboard that gives them the Trinity engine. So there's something I've been thinking of, but I think that the Trinity plug-in is overdue. The O1W I think is overdue, and maybe those are on the slate for this year. But it was interesting to me that they came out with I wouldn't call them obscure, but maybe a few less popular keyboards And maybe the thought is too, they've got the M1 out and the Triton. I mean, what else workstation-wise, romplers, what else do you need? And I get that, but the Trinity still, I think, would be a really nice addition to their plug-in suite. So that's 3. Number 4, I've mentioned this before in a different video when I talked about the OP6. I probably top of my list for anything KORG could do would be the OP6 SE that has been teased and talked about in the past with a premium key bed, a premium build, high quality. I would figure out a way to get that day one. But as I was thinking more about it, they've got the OP6, the ModWave, and the WaveState all available in software form now, just right on the heels of the hardware, which still seems strange to me. But that being said, what if that OP6 SE contained all 3 engines? And they configured the control panel in a way that you could easily still work with any of the 3 engines without having to, well, I don't really know. I don't know how you would do it, but it can be done, I'm sure. But build that control panel so that it can pull triple duty, work for each of the engines. And then maybe you've even got a way to, if you were to build a sequencer on there, maybe you've got a way to feed in all the engines into the same sequencer. Anyway, OP6 SE for sure would be on the top of my list. And then, a 3-in-1 would just be too much to ask for, but it would be really cool. Let's see, that was number 4. I think I might have said number 3. It doesn't matter, we're just talking. So, number 5. Roland has reissued a Juno recently, a Jupiter, at least in name, that have reissued those. And I think they're fairly close to the intent of the original, if not a perfect match. I would like to see KORG do that. I would like to see KORG reissue an M1, for example. I'd like to see a reissue of the O1W. I'd like to see the Trinity. Of course, something like a Poly 6 would really be amazing. But again, I think there's a market. I think there's a pretty substantial market out there right now for 90s sounds. And maybe companies are going to start moving that direction. But I think the 80s have been recreated in so many different forms at this point that it is what it is. I'm not sure what's left to do. But, I think KORG could start that new trend with a 90s reissue. It probably wouldn't make sense to do the Wave Station because you've touted the WaveState as its modern replacement. But again, or I just thought about this, how cool would it be to reintroduce, I'm just going to use the Trinity again because I love it, reintroduce the Trinity as the flagship, make it the Trinity 2 or whatever you want to call it. But build all of that functionality of those different engines into it, whatever you were planning for the successor to the Kronos, but build it into a Trinity body, expand the hardware controls, but, give it a Trinity with all of the modern, you get the USB, the SD card, whatever you want to add to it to modernize it. But I think whether or not you would introduce it as a flagship, I don't know, but I think there would be a market for one of these companies, and I would hope it would be KORG, but for someone to tap into the 90s and put out a reissue. And I have to imagine it wouldn't be that difficult. You're not trying to recreate circuitry like you would be with an analog. So I would think it shouldn't be too tough to do that. But those are kind of the things I've been thinking about lately. Like, what would I like to see from KORG? It is only tobacco, in case you're wondering. So, again, here's my 5 things. A true Kronos successor. I don't think the Nautilus is it. I'm not sold on it. A reverse Rumpler. So give me a KORG Prologue with, a stripped down engine out of something else that gives me good sampled sounds that I can use at a show. I would like to see the Trinity plug-in added to the Legacy collection. The Op6 SE, again, that would be my number 1 wish. Again, if you want to add it, the mod wave and the wave state all in one box, I'm perfectly fine with that. And again, a 90s reissue. Whether that's the O1W, the Trinity, the Z1 was in the 90s as well, if I'm remembering correctly. I mean, does a reissue of a modeling analog modeling synth, does that even make sense? I don't think it probably does, but so one of those workstations. Or, go back a couple of years prior to that and reissue an M1. I mean, I think people would be interested in that. But the reason I was mentioning the O1W and the Trinity specifically was just the fact that there is no software form of those yet. So it seems like they would be ripe for a reissue if you wanted to try to tap into that nostalgia factor, that sound. And of course, I would expect that if they were going to reissue, either one of those, the O1W had 2 banks of 100 sounds and 2 banks of 100 combinations. So basically it had 200 samples, multi-samples, if you will. I mean, you obviously today you could just go crazy with that. You could have the 90, all the KORG 90s stuff in one box if you wanted to. I mean, the possibilities are endless, but yeah, I'd like to see a 90s reissue of something from KORG. I think that would be really cool. So anyway, things have been slow in the studio. I'm still working on an album. I had somebody working with me that I kind of had high hopes for the way that was going. It was the relationship was working well. The recording together, working together. But some things have come up where that's not really going to be a possibility for an extended period of time. So I'm kind of trying to shift myself back into a solo mode, which is where I've spent most of my life anyway, but I've had a hard time kind of readjusting. So the studio work's been going slow. Videos have been going slow. But I mean, we press on, right? That's our choice. We press on or we don't. And so I thought maybe just sitting and talking to no one like I'm doing here would be a good way to get the creative juices flowing a little bit. It's a good opportunity to come out and enjoy a pipe, as I mentioned. So anyway, I hope things are going well for you. I've picked up some subscribers since the last video, thanks to those of you who've subscribed and come along for the ride. Is there anything that you'd like to see from KORG? I'm always interested to hear what other people like, but I just wanted to share this list with you. So yeah, any thoughts you have about anything I've said here, I'd love to hear in the comments below. please consider liking the video. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Please share it with, if you've got friends or people that would be interested in the content that you find here. I'd be grateful. So anyway, until the next time, take care of yourselves and we'll see you soon. Thanks.